Welcome project managers and managers of project managers. Welcome to the future of project management with Samir Pankar. And today I have with me a couple, Mary and Tom. And if you have been in project management for any length of time, I'm sure you must have heard their names. Thank you, Tom and Mary, for doing this. It's a pleasure.
Yes.
You're in a wonderful home.
Thank you.
So Mary, I want to start with this story about the plant process monitoring system. You know what I'm talking about, where you helped implement that. Was that the start of your lean thinking journey?
So when I was in Hutchinson,
Yeah.
and we were making video cassettes. So this is the thing you mean.
Yes.
And
one way to travel.
And
to,
I was
yeah.
IT manager, and
Okay.
we had I was IT manager, and my boss made it clear that meant keep track of all information in the plant, whether it was in computers or not, any kind of system. And we ended up getting rid of a whole bunch of computers, basically all of our scheduling system,
Okay.
and switching to a Kanban or pull-type scheduling system. We had a very aggressive quality management program, and we put this all together sort of before there was such a thing, well, certainly before the name Lean existed,
Right.
and before even just-in-time was common in the US. And we did it because we had serious competition from Japan, and we were seriously worried about our survival,
Right.
and so we were trying to do something different. What we were doing before was what everybody was supposed to be doing. We were following the book, we were doing everything right, and we were not going to survive. So we started doing stuff very different than common practice, and stuff that was considered crazy. Make to stock was what real companies did.
Right.
Make to order, you've got to be kidding. That's only what little time. This rapid make to order, don't make any more than what it is that's being purchased, works when you're working with a new product like videotape at the time, where you don't even know which one of the types of videotapes is going to become common, where you know that next year the tapes will be, have twice as much data on them, so everything will be changing. Even though videotape seems like a product which is going to be stable, and in fact, in some sense it is from a plastics point of view, but in the other sense, what you make has to be matched to what you sell, and therefore you have to match, demand, production to demand, and when you match production to demand, then you have a much more of a pull system, and it worked wonderfully. That plus quality got us out of the woods.
Okay. You also talk about, in the same sort of context, you talk about don't separate design from implementation.
Yes.
That's one of your big items
That's
that you
definitely
promote.
one of my big things.
As a project team, I would say, how do you go about doing that?
Okay, so I never led a project.
Okay.
I
know
only
that.
led product development. We didn't have the title project manager in 3M until the late 90s. But we certainly had lots of people in IT. Projects, if you read the literature in the late 90s, projects became projects during the Y2K thing in IT. Prior to that, there was a lot of stuff that happened. But using the project management paradigm to cause things to happen was not done. That kind of came into being in most of the IT I know about anyway, in the mid to late 90s. Now that's not true, say, in government procurement projects, Department of Defense projects, but inside of our company where we were creating stuff to, systems to deal with the new stuff that we were doing, we had more of a, let's just say, incremental approach to doing stuff.
Okay.
And when I got involved in developing products for 3M, and I did lead quite a few product teams, it was the same thing. It was much more of a take some steps, small steps. Don't fund the whole thing on the front end. Make sure that you have people who are deciding what to do and people who are doing it on the same team. And if you think of projects, the problem with projects, I think, is that it does exactly that. It separates design from implementation. And when you separate design from implementation, that's okay if you're in an existing, unchanging, you know, nothing is going to be different in 10 years kind of an environment.
Right.
But when things are unpredictable, small steps with where you marry the technology with the creativity and figure out in small steps what to do, you have a much better, actually even lower risk, chance of success. So that's what I'm much more used to.
And Tom, was your experience also in product management at some time?
I first encountered lean ideas when I was with Honeywell, working on commercial aviation products. And in that case, it was also in the context of introducing lean ideas into manufacturing. My involvement was a little bit peripheral at that time. I developed a data transfer system to take the design data, parts list, and documentation system that is used to support the navigation systems used in most commercial airlines. And whereas the transfer from engineering to production used to take up to 6 months, by the virtue of the conventions that we negotiated, the standards that we put in place, and the automation that supported it, it would take 6 days to a couple of weeks. So it dramatically sped it up and enabled the people that were doing the design to understand the consequences of the choices that they made for the manufacturing and support of the navigation products. And that, I think, is the critical thing. Every choice you make has a consequence. And not all the consequences are the ones you want, but there's no way to foresee them. When you actually get feedback from the consequence, then you'll make better choices.
Right.
The idea that anybody can figure out on the front what is the best choice to make at multiple levels is really wishful thinking.
And in fact, all theory of complex systems says that incremental change, perturbation, and an understanding the impact is far and away the best and most risk-free way of dealing with complex systems. So the more complex your system is, the more important it is to not separate design from implementation. You have to design a small change and understand its impact. Now, if software is anything, it's got to be complex. It's its fundamental characteristics. Fred Brooks wrote in his Mythical Man Month that it is the fundamental characteristic of software to be complex. And dealing with complex systems is always make a small change and understand the impact. And if you make a big change, you can be guaranteed you're going to have lots of unintended consequences. If you make a very small change, you will also have some small unintended consequences, which you can immediately see feedback and deal with.
Yes. Yeah. In fact, if you look
and understand the cause of.
Yes, it says the cause of. In fact, in one of the startups, if you look at the lean movement in the startups, they have the concept of a minimal viable product.
Right.
Get it out there, get feedback, get maybe even customers,
Right.
then build your system, then build your features.
Yep.
That concept has sort of picked up a lot in the startup community. It's not so much in the
Okay,
corporate
so
sector.
it's an entrepreneurial approach
Yes.
that's not uncommon anywhere. In fact, I was just reading this article in Harvard Business Review about analyzing serial entrepreneurs and how they did stuff. And it says the first thing they did was act, and then they learned,
Right.
and then they repeated the steps either until they accomplished the goal, or realize you can't, or opt for a change in direction.
Correct.
Now, as I read that article, it just basically described how we did new product development in 3M. It says you have to have small, inexpensive, experimental approach. You have to be able to try things without a lot of cost.
Right.
And we could do that. And that's how come 3M was for many decades, such a such an entrepreneurial company with internal entrepreneurs that
Right.
created lots and lots of, blockbuster products, because they took that same entrepreneurial concept and they said, we'll put this inside of a company. So it isn't just entrepreneurs outside in the, in the wild that have learned that the small, inexpensive, experimental approach with incremental funding in any kind of uncertain environment is the least risky and most, in many senses, most predictable way to achieve good results. But it's also not predictable on the high level. It's predictable on a low level. For instance, every single product at 3M needed to have an invention to make it, uncopyable. And inventions you cannot dictate, but it's amazing that inventions came as part of the development process. Because scientists would take a look at the kinds of areas you needed to bend current knowledge in order to make the product viable. And you could, if you had time and incremental approach to stuff, you could always assure that there would be inventions, but you weren't sure exactly how the product would end up, exactly what market it would tackle.
Right.
But in the end, you always, by taking a low-cost incremental approach, would combine the designers with the implementers in the same team with a full system end-to-end feedback loop, you got way better results.
I would speculate that the reason why you could count on inventions happening is that the ideas, the inventions, are the easy part. The hard part is asking the right question that demands an invention. And if you can ask the right question that is informed by the constraints of what's possible with technology, then you can usually find the answer given really good people. But really good people can come up with a limitless number of inapplicable ideas, and they're not worth much at all.
Correct.
So it's asking the right question, discovering what it is that is a valuable solution. That's the key step here. That's where innovation is. It's not in having a good idea, it's in having an idea with provable goodness, which is a very different thing.
So let's say that a company has a bunch of project managers. I will guarantee you that 2/3 or so of those project managers will be really, really good team leaders. And so what I'd like to see is that the concept of, put aside project and think about either platform development or product development, and say, take those really good leaders and have them figure out how to work at a level where they're bringing together the creative, or people who really understand the problem, the market, and the implementers, because any good leaders in projects can also do that. It's just the constraints that you're working on should not be cost, schedule, and scope. There are probably always going to be cost constraints, probably always going to be time constraints. But it's ridiculous to predefine scope in any uncertain environment. That concept that you predefine scope and then create uncertainty around that doesn't work in complex systems. So if you want innovation, you throw out scope and you manage towards a goal where an integrated team, and this is not so much a small team because you have to have multiple disciplines in this, are able to move towards that goal or find a new direction, a new goal with small steps. And anybody who's good at leading teams can lead that kind of a team too.
So let me understand what you're saying. You're saying the future of project management looks like more towards a product, a platform-based approach. And for project managers who are watching, who are today in the role of a project manager in a lot of organizations, does it imply that they need to get more familiar with the domain, with the market, go deep down in a technology? I mean, does that imply anyway?
So Peter Drucker had this theory, and that is that you're going to have strengths in certain areas and weaknesses in certain areas. And what you need to do as a leader is to find somebody to cover for your weaknesses and play to your strengths.
Okay.
So it means that they will be leading teams that have to look at this more broad base with better feedback. It means that they will not have a, if I hit this scope, I know I'm good. Instead, it'll be much more, is it successful in the market? So the measurements will be different, okay? Success will be defined somewhat differently. And if they don't have all of the capabilities to deal with this broad area, then they need to partner with, get in as a partner, somebody who can cover for the areas that they don't cover in. So I've often seen good team leadership provided by two people. One person really understands the technology, a technical lead, and the other person really understands the market, a market lead. And it would be good for a project manager to understand one or the other. Have a deep understanding of the end goal in the market, or a deep understanding of a project. And if not, then to make sure you've got two leaders of the team that pull that together. Another metaphor you can look at is like making films. You have a producer and you have a director. And so you can marry people with different skills as long as you have the way to pull together people who understand both the design and the technology and have an incremental approach to accomplishing a goal, not scope, but a goal. Put a profitable product on the market. Create a platform where advertisers come and users come and and give you a little bit of money on the side. Those kinds of things are what entrepreneurs today are doing. And so you have to be a bit entrepreneurial. But an entrepreneurial leader that doesn't have certain skills is probably best off not trying to get them, but trying to understand how to bring those skills into the team. I've seen entrepreneurs of all different kinds of backgrounds, but they're smart. They get the right kinds of next level people on the team.
Right. I want to switch a little bit of tracks to sort of career path. Both of you, and it's a great combination. Both of you are, speak, write together. You travel together, and sometimes traveling takes a toll. But now you're together and travel. That's a great combination.
Pleasure, yes.
So, how did this come about? Was it conscious?
It was this incremental thing.
It was an incremental thing. There was no scope.
Right. So I took an early retirement leave from 3M, and that meant I had to earn some money for 5 more years. So I had to find something to do, and Tom said he was working in a consulting firm, and he said, there's this thing called project management, you ought to try it. And I said, well, yeah, I should be able to do that. And I got involved as a project manager on a government project, which was basically a disaster. And I kind of got it a little bit out of the hole. It was never, ever going to be good. But when I did that, to be honest, this is the first time I ran into this concept of waterfall. I didn't do that at 3M. We didn't do waterfall. I never heard the word. Nor had I ever heard of CMM, and this was 1998. Okay, that just wasn't in my vocabulary, but that doesn't mean that I did projects when I was an engineer. I did process control projects, and they were all successful, and they were all on time.
Okay.
And I didn't get this concept of you figure it all out at the front, because that's not how engineering projects were ever done. And even today, I wonder if that's true. So when we were designing control systems for plants, we never would have conceived of figuring out scope. We only had a deadline, and we had a date, and those were sacred. And we had a budget, and you didn't spend any more than that, and you did the best control system you could within the constraints, and you used prior history to estimate. You spent a day at it, and that was it. And then you delivered on something that really worked. So that concept was my idea of a project. And then we had this waterfall thing, and I said, how could this work? Guess what? It didn't work. And so I decided to write a book. And as I was writing the book, came into the early 2000s, and there was a big economic downturn at that time, right after Y2K stuff. And Tom was laid off from Tom's firm closed, basically.
Oh, okay.
And so he came and joined me in the company, and we co-authored the book. And then one time I was invited to give a talk in London. and at a XP Day. Maybe 2004. Maybe it was 2003.
Probably three.
End of three. And so I accepted, and then I noticed that the airfare, because it was right around Thanksgiving, was really cheap. And I said, oh, heck, Tom may as well come for $350 for a trip. How can you not do that, right? So he came, and I ended up being invited to go on a couple of other little side excursions up to Glasgow and stuff like that. And it was a very intense, stressful trip.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was traveling around, and Tom was, lugging stuff, and so we were solving problems together and stuff like that, I said, now, I was going to do this by myself. How dumb is that? And from then on, I said, phooey, we're going to travel together. It's so much easier to deal with travel problems, to bounce ideas off of each other, that sort of stuff. So from then on, we just simply did this thing together as a team, and it just kind of happened.
Pairing works much better than individual work. It gives better results with less stress.
And you can answer this question turn by turn. Who are some of your other role models? Who did you learn from? Who did you look up to?
I liked anybody who'd written a book,
Mm-hmm.
because I had wanted to write books. So Jim Highsmith and Martin Fowler had written books, and other folks.
Mm-hmm.
And they were forming this thing called Agile Alliance. The original board of directors was basically authors.
Right.
And authors, therefore, being an author, gave them a name. And I liked to write, and I'd always dreamed of writing a book about something. I needed something to say, though. And having something to say, I joined the Agile Alliance board as the managing director treasurer. And the reason for that was so that I could, do a favor for authors, and then they might give me some idea about how to be an author. And it really worked pretty well. So Jim Highsmith gave me a lot of guidance on the first book that I wrote, and was the series editor. And so I liked people who were doing the kind of things that I envisioned would be a cool thing to do.
Okay.
And it was people who were writing, people who were speaking, and I kind of looked at what they did, and I said, I could do that. So I did.
Tom, your...
We've always admired the work of Kent Beck, who is one of the pioneers in breaking free from the old ways of plan everything up front, and understood that you had to work it up as you went along. As he's admitted, he made some mistakes in the way he approached XP, the primarily one being the separation of design from implementation. And that happened when he defined the customer. By separating out the customer, or in the case of Scrum, the mistake is the product owner. By separating the design responsibility, the decision for deciding how to solve a problem and exactly what the problem is, from the solution of the problem, we ended up with very rapid delivery of things that people didn't know they asked for. And while it might have reduced the cost and reduced the delay, it did not necessarily improve the effectiveness and the value of the solutions that we delivered.
Okay. Yeah, that's true. Before I go to the last question, there's one final question I have. For the audience who is watching, most of these are project managers who are or product managers, some of them. What advice would you give them if you can take turns? If you were to leave them with a piece of advice, what would you say to them?
Go ahead, Tom.
The value that you deliver to your customer base requires that you understand the customer's problem. It requires that you understand that you can incorporate the limitations of the technology. If you can't do either one of those things, the value that you can provide is fairly limited. All the successful companies we've seen, everybody down to the level of individual developers, has contact with the problem space. they're not simply handed a list of things to do and then monitored as to whether they do them within constraints.
Yeah.
They are all contributing to creating a brilliant solution to a meaningful problem. And in the end, I think that meaningful work delivered by competent people is really the bottom line. If the work is not meaningful to the people doing it, if it doesn't have a purpose, if they don't understand why they're doing it, the result will be of very limited value.
Yeah, and when people do meaningful work, it shows. It shows in the way they act, it shows in the product, it shows in, just everywhere. And it shows in the market.
Yeah.
There's a great need for leadership in bringing new ideas and new products to market. And somebody who's been a successful project manager has learned how to do good leadership. So break out of the constraints that the word project brings to mind. And think about leading people to create stuff that is really long-term and known success. So if you look at, I don't know, let's just take Apple and Google or even Ford, and every one of them has done rather amazing things in the last few years. And every one of them talks about, at Google, it's the intersection of technology, of engineering and design. At Apple, it's the intersection of technology and the arts. At Ford, the whole concept that Alan Mullally brought was a matrix concept, so that people that were in product development and in marketing and in all of the other functions were at the top level of the company and then mirrored on down through every area of the company. Cross-functional teams, and by cross-functional, I mean really cross-functional teams, including all of the functions necessary to create the product. Now, a good project manager can be a good leader of that kind of team. And so think of your leadership skills as opposed to the practical day-to-day things that you've learned how to do. Think of the way that you bring people together to understand problems and to be dedicated to making those problems happen. And there's a massive need for people like that in this world.
Yeah, I bet they're in demand. One last question I have for both of you. From all the other things that you do, writing and talking and traveling, what are some of your other interests and hobbies? I know, Tom, one of your hobbies, and maybe you can start with that.
He gets to talk about his hobby, yes.
I do photography.
Okay.
Three kinds of things. One is family. One is I love shooting conferences and capturing moments that people experience when they're learning things at a conference.
Okay.
And the third is travel. Cities, scenery, mountains, animals, all sorts of things like that. I just finished rebuilding a server. It's up to 14 terabytes right now.
Oh.
It will probably top out around 40
Wow.
to hold all my pictures.
Traveling, where's the one place that you haven't been, that you want to go?
That's hard.
Yeah?
As our speaking and writing and teaching is our retirement hobby.
That's a nice hobby.
It lets us travel around the world
Yeah?
and get to all kinds of interesting things where we can insert vacation since we're already there.
Yeah?
So we've been to cities in every continent,
Okay.
45 countries I think when we last counted.
Wow.
Been back to many of them several times.
Mm-hmm.
The only place that I'm really interested in going is one that I don't expect to get invited to, and that's Antarctica. The penguins do not do much software.
No product
So,
development there.
That's the one place I'd like to go that haven't had a chance.
Okay. Mary, your hobbies, interests?
So I like not just the travel, but the logistics behind it.
Oh.
I like organizing our trips and then
Wow.
actually seeing them happen. And as we've managed to get to just about everywhere we wanted to go, my next hobby is to bring our family to see these places. So we brought our daughter and her husband and her 2 children to see Greece.
Okay.
And we had them plus my son to see Norway and the fjords. And then we went to New Zealand, including in that trip my son's fiance. And so we bring our families to see these places. We go and teach for a while, and then we have a nice vacation, and everybody flies in. And I'm the one that does all the organizing behind that. I like the logistics. When I was working as treasurer of Agile Alliance, I liked the financial part. I do that for my company too, so I like the background, sort of getting everything organized at the same time that I like actually seeing it happen and sharing it with my family.
It's a wonderful second career if you think about it.
It's a wonderful second career.
It's a great career.
You know, as nice as it seems, I just have to warn you, it's a whole lot of work.
Yeah.
And people don't tend to see, and it's also, you know, Jim Collins wrote about companies that become suddenly great. You think, wow, that was easy. And you don't look at the years upon years upon years that it took for them to grow and get to that point where they were doing that, of hard work and focus. And I like to point out to people that we started this a long time ago, and it took, 4 years before we actually made it.
Correct.
And so you put a lot of effort into something that you focus on, and you see the final objective, and you gradually go there. And when, you know, suddenly stuff seems to fall into place with any environment, any company, anything, it falls into place because there was a lot of ground laid ahead of time.
That's it.
So it's really fun, but it took a lot to get here.
That is so good. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been wonderful talking to both of you.
You too.
And for those of you who are watching, you can connect with Mary and Tom. They have a website. They have written lots of books.
So it's Mary or Tom, one of you. Mary at Poppendieck.com and Tom at Poppendieck.com. And the only thing you need to do in order to get there is to spell our last name correctly, which is Poppendieck.
Dieck.
Right.
So get that right. Thank you everyone for watching. This is Future of Project Management. And if you like this interview, sign up for more updates on the blog. Thank you so much.